Welcome back. Ken Newhouse here, recapping the Republican debate. Next topic is Governor Mike Huckabee defending the FairTax. This other night, we had Governor Mike Huckabee on Fox News during this 10-person debate talking about the FairTax and how he thinks it will benefit the United States as his new tax code. Joining us right now is historian Mr. Lloyd Sloan. How are you doing, Lloyd?
Very good, Ken, and good to be on your show. I guess you decided that I was not happy about the FairTax just because I am a co-founder of an organization, No Mo Sales Tax, here in Missouri, and we don't like sales taxes. The FairTax is a very fraudulently named proposal to basically abolish the income tax, which, you know, that sounds like a good idea in many ways, but to replace it with a national sales tax, and that is regressive and hurts the poor. And our organization, No Mo Sales Tax, is dead set against such an idea.
Lloyd, I'm going to play a quick clip here. It's about from 4 years ago. RightWingWatch.org recorded an interview with Governor Mike Huckabee, and he wanted to explain how the FairTax relates to the Bible.
The FairTax is a tax on consumption, not productivity.
And
Why
like
should you
that.
punish people for their productivity? You shouldn't. Yeah. But if you tax consumption, guess what? The richest people will pay the most taxes because they consume more.
Even crooks.
But everybody will pay something. See, I believe in the biblical understanding of stewardship. Everybody should have something invested. God doesn't say, oh, you're too poor, don't give anything. He says everyone give a tithe. Now, what does that mean? I gave a tithe, James, when Janet and I barely could rub two nickels together.
Sure.
We were looking for the other nickel in the sofa cushion.
Yeah,
so
right.
I understand what, but you know what? God blessed on
Absolutely.
giving, whether we had a lot or whether we didn't. And God's blessed us recently. We're grateful for that. But I'm telling you something. Giving proportionally is biblical.
What say you, Mr. Sloan?
Oh, my goodness, there's several errors that I heard there. I should have written them down, but let me just, how about we go back to front? First of all, is giving proportionately biblical? The phrase that I recall in the Bible is, to whom much is given, much is expected. So I don't know if that's what Mr. Huckabee means by proportional or not, but generally the more you have, my reading of that scripture is the more you should pay. And I am not in the habit of taxing poor people and claiming Jesus told me to do it. I think it's the exact opposite. If you're trying to, there's plenty of biblical quotes to support helping the poor, but if you're going to help them, the first thing you ought to do is get off their backs. And I don't understand how hypocritically in this society we pretend to help the poor while we tax them. To advocate a tax like sales taxes, which are regressive. So that's the other error I heard. He says, well, the rich buy more, so they pay more. As a percentage of income, the rich spend far less on hamburgers and cheeseburgers than do the poor. We don't actually tax the things that rich people buy. So stock sales, bond sales, real estate sales, things like this that rich people actually buy are not taxed by sales taxes. Whereas things that poor people buy, clothes, gasoline, whatever, general consumption items, those do get taxed under sales taxes, and they represent a higher percentage of poor people's income. It is totally disingenuous of Mr. Huckabee to claim that his tax is not regressive and doesn't hurt the poor more. I'm trying to remember the other error he said it's a tax on consumption rather than production, and that's a good idea. You can't, in a society, you can't consume what you don't produce. All taxes are on production ultimately because there's no other place to get it. You can't consume it until somebody makes it and actually produces the thing. If anything, the least tax on production would be taxes on land and things like this that are already out there. Nobody is producing more land. So if you really want a tax that doesn't tax production, you tax land and other natural resources that are already there and no one's making more of them. That would be a better way to approach it. The whole idea of the fair tax, I'll just end with this because I know that's a fairly lengthy response, but the fair tax is inappropriately named to me, and that ought to cause people's suspicions right off the bat. It's as if these people have invented a magic way to tax that it doesn't matter how much we tax, and it doesn't matter, what the purpose of the tax, and all of a sudden it becomes fair because, voila, we have a sales tax, and that's fair. Let me strongly state that not only are sales taxes unfair, they tax the poor more, they actually force business into being the tax collectors for the society, which is unfair. But the truth is, a 30% sales tax is also more unfair than a 1% income tax, and I'll end with that.
Okay, Lloyd, I'm just looking here at fairtax.org. They give their rundown on what the fair tax is about. There's one thing I'm seeing here. Pay tax on only what you spend. So say we have another financial crisis like 2008 when President Bush was coming out of office and transitioning over to President Obama. We had the whole housing bubble issue, which you're very knowledgeable about, all the TARP bailouts and the stimulus packages, none of that even working. So what happens if we have another financial crash and it says pay only what you spend? What's going to happen then? I know you love the government having less revenue than what it currently has, and I do too, and we can agree on the same thing there. But what will happen though if the government's still running at the same revenue, but when we switch over to a fair tax system, what happens when no one's spending as much as they are at say now compared to like a 2000?
Yeah, I think obviously you see that the sales taxes will go down if the government goes into the tank, or excuse me, if the economy starts to go into a recession or into depression in the worst case, then certainly your sales tax revenues will go down as well. That's probably what you want because you want to stimulate the economy, so you want the taxes to go down. The real issue is, will the sales tax actually cause recessions? All taxes are going to create some problems in an economy. Income taxes, sales taxes, property taxes. Doesn't matter how you tax when you start doing it, and if you do it too much, you're going to cause economic downturns. Japan is an excellent example, and I guess most Americans will not be familiar with this, but Japan doubled their sales taxes recently. This was how they were going to deal. They had a similar crisis to Greece. Their economy was in trouble. Their government can't pay its debts. Where we heard this before, and they decided the sales tax was the answer. Well, what they got was not an increase in revenues. What they got was an economic recession again, and it gets worse. It doesn't get better. So, that's the short answer to. There is no magic way to get out of this other than, and this has nothing to do with no more sales tax. This is me speaking as Lloyd Sloan, and not as part of an organization because I would say the best way to tax, if you want the least impact on growth, are property taxes. They also are highly unpopular, but that would be the least negative impact on economic growth. The most negative impact on growth are income taxes. They have the worst impact, and sales taxes are in the middle. But don't kid yourself that there is a magic way to tax that doesn't have a negative impact on growth rates. You need to reduce your spending. You need to balance your budgets. You need to do the obvious common sense things that everybody knows we should do. And then some highfalutin PhD economist tells us, no, we can actually dance in midair forever. And no, you can't. All right? So.
All right, Lloyd. Well, we only have a couple more minutes here talking about the fair tax. And NOMO Sales Tax, of course, is your organization here in Missouri. Is like you said, you're wanting to get rid of the sales tax here across the state of Missouri. There's one thing I want to get to is that there's a national fair tax, and then there's a state model that kind of represents the fair tax, but it leaves out one key component in what is called the prebate, is what they say in the fair tax. So what happens there? What do you think of the prebate and the national sales tax, and why is it even more disproportional for the poor and middle class in a state model because the prebate doesn't exist?
Yeah, the state models typically don't have the prebate. That's actually an excellent point. I do want to be fair to the fair tax people. They often at the national level do recognize that the sales taxes they're imposing are regressive. So in order to compensate for that somewhat, you cannot totally compensate for it. Lower incomes are still going to be paying more of this than higher incomes. But they at least give what they call a prebate, which is a subsistence level amount. Probably would come down to $4,000 or something like that, maybe a little higher, to every American citizen. And that would refund to them the amount of sales taxes they pay on what the fair tax people consider to be necessary items like food and things like that for subsistence. So that compensates somewhat for the regressive nature. That could be a mixed reaction. Some people may like that idea. I do not. I think that's going down the wrong This makes no sense to me at all. You're admitting that your sales tax is regressive, and your answer is an even bigger government program to fix that problem. That is exactly what we do not need. Instead, I'll give you an example of what I like. I like the Rand Paul tax plan approach. We call that bottom-up tax cutting. If you really want to take the burden off the poor, what you do is you just exempt the first $100,000 in income. Now, that's more than just poor, but that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. So that helps the middle class as well. And that means the first $100,000 of income, the federal government does not tax. So if you make $99,000, you don't owe any tax. If you make $101,000, you owe a tax on $1,000, not on the full amount, but just on that $1,000 extra that you made. This type of approach with a flat rate, which is what Rand Paul did. He has a flat 14.5% rate. He abolished the FICA tax, which is the payroll tax, Social Security. That sounds like a reasonable approach to me to eventually get us off the current mess. And everyone agrees it's a mess, so we agree at no more sales tax. Now, typically at the state levels, they do not have a prebate. So these state taxes are actually highly regressive. The federal income tax is not regressive until you get to extreme high levels. By that, so people can understand this, you'll never know what these high levels are, most people who hear my voice on this. But if you get to Mitt Romney's level, where you're making $15 million a year, then, yeah, he can pay a 15% rate because he's making his income through dividends and capital gains, and those are taxed at a lower rate. If you're making your money by going out and selling widgets, or, you happen to be Albert Pujols and a great baseball player, so you're making your money through wages like that, you're going to be taxed at very high rates, over 35%. I think it's 38 now, something like that. We went back to the pre-Bush levels.
39.6.
39.6, thank you. I mean, that's pretty high. I mean, I think we all know that's high. And you add a state income tax, there's no doubt that some people are being overtaxed at very high rates. And then you have the Mitt Romneys that are basically very wealthy and paying less than the average American. That's what I mean by regressive. So the tax system is clearly a mess. Rand Paul's approach gets rid of all that. He treats all income the same. He taxes it all at the same rate. And he simply has a very high exemption at the bottom. His is not $100,000, but a family of four that made $50,000 would pay no federal income tax. So that's about where his cutoff is. I personally think it should be higher than, I think I would push it higher than that even. But these are details to be worked out between reasonable people. The fair tax is not reasonable to me. I react very strongly against it. I think it's a con. I really think they called it fair, and that alone should tell us it's anything but.
Lloyd, we have just about a minute left here before we have to get going and go to break. But one more question for you, sir. What are you doing with no-mo sales taxes coming up legislative session here in Missouri? Give us just a few tidbits on that in a minute or less, if you can.
No, I appreciate that, Ken. And we started the organization about 2 years ago, and have made progress every year. And so membership growing, we filed a bill even in the first year, but it didn't get very far. And the second year, we also filed a bill to get rid of, to at least reduce sales taxes and to phase them out over a 4 or 5 year period. That bill was replaced with one that was even more modest, but it did get a hearing. So last year, we were able to get a hearing on the bill. This year, we hope to get a sponsor to stick to the real long-term plan, the complete elimination of sales taxes in Missouri. We think that would be a huge boon to the state. Missouri is unique in that its two major cities are right there on the border with other states. So both Kansas City and St. Louis are sitting right next to Illinois and right next to Kansas on the western side. I'm in St. Louis side. And basically, the number of people in Kansas and Illinois that would come to shop in Missouri because we're right there on those borders is huge. So we think there'd be a big benefit to Missouri by getting rid of the sales taxes. There are other, probably would gain in Springfield and the Ozark region, the Branson region, just because they're a tourist attraction. That helps them as well. We see lots of benefits relative to other states getting rid of sales taxes, as well as just general benefits to the poor in the state and to general economic development. So there's our case.
Mr. Sloan, thank you so much. Thank you so much today for joining us. Look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you for having me, Ken.
No problem.
Very good. Yeah, very much appreciated.